A wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he needs to. Happy Halloween. I'm Adam, and this is the Halloween edition of Adam Answers. Thanks for joining me. Ooh, oh man, I still got all that hair kind of everywhere. I would do the entire show in the Gandalf costume, but it's very itchy and very finicky. I mean, that hair, people with long hair, I just have respect for. That hair is just everywhere. It reminds me of that scene in Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, where um Gandalf has this just like crazed look on his face when he's talking to Frodo and about the ring. And it just reminds that's what that kind of felt like. But that was my Gandalf costume. Welcome to Adam Answers. I'm Adam, and I answer anything. Not because I know everything, but because I love alliteration. Adam answers anything, and I love wrestling with difficult questions, questions that cause you to think, questions to reflect on. Not because I think I have the greatest or the best answers, but because I think that everyone should be thinking about difficult questions. It's how we grow as intellectuals. So tonight is a little different. Obviously, it's a Thursday, not a Friday. I had gotten into a routine of doing the episode on Friday, but it's a little different today because tomorrow is Halloween. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll do an episode on Thursday. So that way I'm not like doing a live stream on Friday and just kind of conflicting with the holiday itself. Plus, one of the things I wanted to do was tell ghost stories. I mean, it's Halloween. Who doesn't want to tell ghost stories? And so I kind of phrased it into a question: do you believe in ghosts? And so that's kind of going to be the question that I'm going to tackle today or tackle tonight. Before I dive into this, before I dive into it tonight, I just have two things, quick things that I want to say. The first thing is, the first thing is, if you at all have been watching the show and you have a question that you would love to ask, leave a question for me in this Google form right over here. So you see this QR code right over there. Scan the QR code and go fill out a form, and you can just type in your question, hit submit, and I would love to wrestle with whatever question that you send my way. Also, if you have any interest, because I would love this, right? Because there's a part of me that almost renamed the show to Adam Talks because that's kind of just what I do. Is I kind of just talk a lot. But I would love to hear you talk. I would love to hear what you have to say. I would love to hear your perspective on questions that we wrestle with. And so there's an option in that Google form sheet for you to select whether or not you would actually like to be on the show to wrestle with a specific question together. So if you're thinking about it, please go ahead, hit that or scan that QR code. I would love to hear from you. Second thing is, especially with today's episode, if you have a perspective on the question of the day, I would love to hear your perspective. I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Leave your thoughts over in the chat if you happen to be watching live. I would love to hear what you have to say. And as always, hit that subscribe button. You know, it always helps. It helps every YouTuber, so that includes me. But I would love to, yeah, I would love to dive into today's discussion. Do you believe in ghosts? So the way I'm going to approach it isn't necessarily. I'm not going to like dive into the question specifically. So that question was more of just my way of like trying to wrap up this episode in a way that's consistent with Adam answering questions. In reality, I want to share for those who haven't ever heard some of my life story. Because believe it or not, ghosts, ghouls, and creepy things that crawl at night have a place in my past, unfortunately. And so I would love to share some of those stories. And I would love to hear some of your stories as well. So if you are logged on, you're watching live, um, drop it in the chat. I would love to hear some of your spooky stories as well. But I'm going to start off just kind of briefing through like some of the stories of when I was younger. And again, this kind of all like, I want to say this like kind of all builds up. There's like a cumulative effect to these stories where it starts off as like an innocent thing, and then suddenly it explodes into like this out of control, like having these weird experiences kind of thing. And then it just kind of simmers down. So when I was a kid, I don't remember how old I was, to be honest. I think I was 7, maybe 8. And by the way, um, if you've ever followed our podcast, so we had a podcast called For the Love of It, then we renamed it to the Nightly Nugget. But if you've ever followed the podcast, this is actually, these stories are going to be the same stories from that podcast, which would be last year, I think, or maybe last year or the year before. Actually, no, I think it's the year before, when we did a podcast episode about spooky stories. So 2 years ago, actually. Anyway, so when I was a kid, I think I was 8, maybe 9. I don't remember specifically, but I remember this vividly, and I don't remember some of the small details. But I remember when I was a kid. I have a cousin, and that cousin was, I guess, kind of babysitting me. Well, maybe not babysitting me. Maybe she was just watching me. I don't remember specifically why I was with her, but I remember being with her. And I remember her asking me if I wanted to go get ice cream. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, I'm a kid. Like, of course I want ice cream. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to go get ice cream. And we were at the park, and I was like playing on the wooden play sets that kids play on. And I remember her saying, well, we're going to stop at my friend's house, or we have to go here to this place, and then we'll go get ice cream. I thought, okay, well, I just want ice cream, right? I mean, I was a kid. I was 8 or 9 years old. I loved Superman ice cream. I loved that Blue Moon, or what's it called? Like Cookie Monster ice cream. I loved that stuff. So we walk into this big barn. It's like a big old wooden barn. And I honestly don't remember exactly how we got there. I don't know if we walked there from the park that we were at. I don't know if we drove there, someone drove us there. I have no idea, right? Because my cousin was also young at this time. And so I don't remember exactly how we got there, but I remember we walk into this big, just like wooden barn, and there was a group of people in the barn sitting in a circle. And I thought it was weird. Like, we walk in and it's dark, and there's like a couple of candles in the middle of the barn where the circle is. And I thought, like, "Man, this isn't an ice cream shop. I just want ice cream." And we sit down in the circle. And as we sit down, someone starts talking. There's some leader of the group or circle. I don't remember any of the people that were there. I don't know any of them. I don't remember anything about them, but I just remember there's a circle of people, and someone starts talking, and they say, you know, "Spirit, come to us, show us your power," stuff like that. And I started like getting really nervous. Like, I didn't know what was going on because I was so young, but I had a pretty good idea that, like, whatever this is, it's not as good as ice cream. And I was like, I was starting to get scared. Well, as this person's talking to, whoever they're talking to, and they were talking to a spirit, we'll say that, a demonic force. That's what they were talking to. Some people in the group started shouting, like, oh. And I was like, what is going on with everybody? Why is everybody jumping? And the next thing I knew, someone grabbed my arm, like if someone was behind you and they kind of grab your arm from the back. And I thought, oh, like, who's grabbing me? And I turn around, nobody's there. But I had got grabbed, like forcibly grabbed by the arm. Weird experience. Honestly, I don't remember what happened after that. I'm assuming we went and got ice cream. I hope we did, but that was one of my earliest memory. I would say that is my earliest memory of having a paranormal experience. From there, my family and I had moved into a house, and um, Carpathia Drive. I still remember the road that it was on. This house is what was the house that we lived in from, I want to say, from the ages of when I was like, man, maybe ages 6 through 9. And this house was 100% certifiably haunted. And a couple of stories about that house. And just the other day, actually, I was talking about this with my parents, and my dad confirmed this story, or he confirmed that the house was indeed haunted. But there was a specific night when I went to bed. My brother and I think we were sharing a room at the time, I believe. And I went to bed, and I remember laying in bed awake all night long because I heard voices coming from what I thought was the next room, right? There are voices that were, I could hear them coming out of the vent. And so I thought, well, my parents must be talking up late at night because the vent must connect to their room. And so they must be just talking all night. And I'm like, why? Like, mom and dad, why don't you just go to sleep? I'm trying to get sleep and I can't fall asleep because all you're doing is talking. Well, next thing I know, my dad walks into my room and it's like 6:30 in the morning and it's time to get ready for school. I'm just like, I did not sleep. I didn't get a single wink of sleep that entire night. And I said, guys, I said, why weren't you guys asleep? You guys were talking all night long and it kept me awake. My parents looked at me like weird. They're like, what are you talking about? We were sleeping the entire night. And that's when I knew that my parents weren't awake. In fact, that vent doesn't connect our rooms. That vent is like it feeds in from the AC. And so I immediately thought, well, someone was talking all night long, and I didn't know who it was. In fact, at that house, that very house, this house on Carpathia, this small house, I remember my first paranormal experience there actually was when I was playing soccer in the front yard. And I remember kicking the ball and running to get the ball in the front yard, and I clear as day heard a woman calling my name. It was like up and kind of up and to the right of where I was, and I just heard a Adam, and I looked up, and I'm like who's there? Nobody's there. Someone just called my name, and I'm like, I mean, I know it's not my cousin because she ain't gonna get me ice cream again, but no, she's not there. So that was my earliest experience. Then I remember this was something that to this day my brother doesn't remember, but I remember clear as day. Maybe it's the fact that maybe my brother wasn't actually there, but I remember this as clear as day, waking up in the middle of the night and hearing what sounded like someone tearing our living room apart. Like I thought what it sounded like somebody was in our living room searching for something, and they were tossing furniture, pulling out drawers, throwing everything on the ground. I thought surely something's going on, like someone broke into our house. And I was a kid, so I was obviously terrified. And I remember peeking out the door of our bedroom, looking down the hallway and seeing, so you go down the hallway and to the right is where our TV living room is. And I saw the lights on, and I could hear what sounded like someone just trashing our living room. Obviously, I was scared, so I didn't go out there. But I remember the next morning waking up, going into the living room, and just everything's just sitting there, totally fine, like totally okay, not destroyed, not turned over, not nothing at all. And that was bewildering and terrifying. I remember my dad would say that when he was up late studying in the house, because he was in graduate school at this time when we lived in that house, he would often stay up later to do homework and whatnot while we went to bed. And he would often say that he heard what sounded like a girl or a woman singing in the basement. I mean, if you hear singing in a basement at 3 in the morning, you know that there's probably no one just casually in your basement living there singing at 3 in the morning. That usually doesn't like normally happen, maybe in your house, but not this one. And so it was a little unnerving. Those were my earliest paranormal encounters and experiences. My thought, or I guess my thought about all of that is that when I was a kid, I think that unintentional seance, because that's what it was, with my cousin, I think that unintentionally opened up something that shouldn't have been opened for me. And I think that's what made me more susceptible to things at that house on Carpathia that we lived in. Well, we moved, and the new house that we had moved to, not haunted, thank goodness. Grew up there, graduated high school, right? Had some weird experiences when I was a senior in high school. I remember my friends and I, we wanted to start our own like ghost hunting group and whatnot, and we never really started a ghost hunting group. It was just an idea that we had. And I remember putting an ad on Craigslist back in the day, Craigslist, an ad that talked about how we were a ghost hunting group. We want to come and do investigations. And this elderly man contacted us and said he would love for us to come check his house out for ghosts. And we remember going over to his house, and I think one of the guys, it was one of my friends, I believe, heard a voice, or they saw someone, or they heard a voice that was around the house, but there was no one else living there except the old man. And the old man said, "Oh, did you see Jim?" Or I forgot what his name was, but did you see Jim? And Jim was the guy that I think he had died there, and so that was a very interesting experience. But it didn't. That whole thing didn't last very long. And then I got to college, and when I was in college, I worked as a safety officer, as a campus safety officer. My first year, kind of in the summer after my first year as well, and I worked a lot of red eye shifts. Now the red eye shifts were mostly at in the summer. It's not during the school year, but I worked pretty much every day at red eye shift. And at first, it was really nice, especially if you're someone that loves liminal spaces and kind of loves the quiet stillness of the nighttime, especially if you're someone that just loves just kind of having that alone time. But after a while, I would hear and see things that made me question if either I was going insane, or maybe I was starting to see things that maybe perhaps I shouldn't. I remember hearing the piano in one of the lecture halls playing at 3 in the morning, when there was obviously no one in the building, right? Because I you do safety patrols of every single building, and you have to check every single door and make sure that it's all locked, and that's what you do as a safety officer. And I had checked every door, and there was nobody in that building, but I remember vividly hearing that door, or hearing that piano play. And so I had a few like kind of strange, weird experiences when I was a campus safety officer, and that was just one of them. I remember seeing like faces in the windows when I would go, especially when I would go to check the dining hall. I would go into the dining commons, and I'd be checking the dining hall, and I there's lots of windows around the dining hall, and I would see these like weird shapes and these weird faces as I would shine my flashlight through the windows. And it looked like there was like shadows that would dash out of the way as soon as I would shine my light on them. There were other instances where I remember, this is probably one of the most vivid. I don't want to say visual hallucinations, but I'll say the most vivid, just like seeing something, was when I remember I was sleeping. I was taking a nap in the middle of the day in college, and in my dorm room, and I woke up and I saw this massive spider just on my bed crawling towards me. I mean, it was as real as day. Like it was as real as you and I. And so I had pretty uneasy, strange experiences when I was a campus safety officer. But a lot of those experiences, as you're probably already thinking, can be explained very simply by the fact that I was working a red eye shift, or the fact that it's nighttime, and light, and no sleep can play things with your mind. It can play tricks on you, perhaps. Perhaps some of those were unexplicable, perhaps some of them were, and they had perfectly reasonable explanations. I don't know. Well, at this time, kind of around this same time in my life, I maybe not got involved in some things that I shouldn't have, and some substances that I shouldn't have, and um, nothing terribly terrible by any measure, but it was, maybe not a good idea. At the time, it was actually very legal. It was 100% legal. You could go to a head shop and just purchase some bud, and it was like it was totally fine. Today, I don't think it's legal anymore, as far as I know. I mean, you'd have to look it up, but my friends and I, we used to do salvia, and that was a thing that we were into for that first year of college. Well, there was this one time. Well, if you don't know, by the way, because I don't, you probably shouldn't go look it up, but salvia is a hallucinogenic, and it's one of the most potent, actually. And we were very, very surprised and shocked at the time to discover that it was legal where we were in Pennsylvania. And so we decided, well, we're going to go to a shop and we're going to pick some up and just see what this salvia stuff is about. So that's what we did. And I remember doing some, and it's a lot like marijuana. And so I smoked it, and immediately I was transported to a different reality. It was me. I was sitting in a car, and the person driving was my friend, and he was a sitter. So he was someone who he wasn't high or anything like that. He was just there to make sure that I was fine. And so we were in his car. It was late at night, and it was at a park. And so it was just the parking lot was empty. And so I took a hit of the salvia, and I remember the whole world just like flipping. Like if you've ever seen Stranger Things, it felt like I was in the upside down. And when I appeared in the upside down, when I appeared in this different world, this different reality, I started panicking because I didn't know where I was. I was like I knew that I had left this reality. And I looked, and in the distance were these three beings that were really tall and sort of skinny and lanky, and they were standing in a group as if they were just standing around talking to one another. And when I looked over and I saw them, they glanced at me and they had a look of surprise on their face, like they did not expect me to suddenly just show up and be there in this weird place. Well, I panicked and I started yelling for my friend, and my friend thankfully grabbed my arm and woke me up. And I was back into the real world. But that was such a bizarre experience. Ultimately, it was beneficial because I decided never to touch the stuff again after that, and neither should you. But that experience never left me. Well, that summer, okay, so that was during the school year. That summer, I ended up coming back to Michigan for just the summer vacation, right? Summer in between semesters, in between school years. And I was living just at my parents' house, and I was back in my own bedroom. And I would stay up late because remember, this was kind of right after I had left my job as a safety officer, where I was working lots of night shifts. So even though I wasn't a safety officer anymore, I was still prone to just being up late at night. And so I would be up late at night playing video games. I played a lot of video games at this point in my life. But I remember going to bed one of those nights, and as I laid in bed, I remember looking over at the closet and just seeing this shadow that encompassed like a whole half of the closet. And it was really bizarre because I knew that that part of the closet was darker than it should have been. And I'm sitting there and I'm just staring at this complete, like when I say shadow, I mean like I couldn't see anything that was in the closet, even though there was clearly moonlight pouring into the room. And not just that, but I felt I could, even more potent was the feeling. I had this sensation, this feeling that I was very much obviously being watched. If you've ever had the feeling like you're being watched and you turn around and see that someone's watching you, that's what the feeling was. But I couldn't specifically see like a person watching me. It was just this area. And so I just laid there staring at it. And eventually I would fall asleep. But that happened several nights in a row. And I remember one of the nights that it happened, I was laying there And as I was staring at it, could feel this like something come towards me and whisper into my ear, "I'll be back." And then the presence left, and I never felt it again. And I never experienced it, never had it come back, nothing of the nature. It was gone. And that really put me on edge. Even though by that time I had had so many experiences like that that I honestly didn't think much of it. I thought, oh goodness, he's gone. I can finally sleep. Um, but that was a little unnerving. Now, throughout college, I would often have these dreams, and this is sort of like one aspect of it. I would have these dreams where there's this house. Now, what's interesting about this house is I have had dreams about this house consistently for like over 10, 15 years in my life. The same house in the same place, the same interior, the same exterior. And a lot of times the same exact things happen. And it's strange because in this house, well, I guess I could describe the house. If you imagine like just like not the middle of the woods, but sort of like country rural ish, but with lots of a little bit more trees. And there's a colonial style home, just a colonial style house. It's got your typical number of windows, your typical number, like just two floors, and your typical like white exterior paneling, house. And that's kind of what it's like. Um, and the back, the kitchen, so it's actually somewhat of a galley kitchen in the house on the first floor. And from the kitchen there's a big window where you can see the backyard as you're at the sink. And as you walk into the house, however, like it's actually kind of a big entry. There's kind of a big entryway where you walk into the house, and there's stairs that can take you up to the second floor. And in the second floor, there's this one specific room, and I've never really I've never really seen how many rooms are in this house, but I do know that there's this one specific room in the house where if you go to the closet of this room, there's sort of attic access. You could say it's attic access. But when you climb up into the attic, it's actually like a whole nother room. And there's usually piles of clothes or piles of something that you have to just weed through in order to get out up into this attic, into this other room. And suddenly you're actually in a different house. And if you leave the room that you've just come up in and you open the door, you'll see that you're actually in a different house. But this house feels so dark. It feels very mysterious and feels very ominous. There is like an immense, heavy darkness that's there, and you know that something's not right. And I've had dreams of this house many times where I've gone up into that attic and into that other house that's there and had just wild experiences. I remember one time I was in the other house and I was just laying on the couch, but like I kept getting pictures of like shadows and like figures on my phone as I was laying there. I remember another time that I was there. This is the funniest. My brother and I were like ghost hunting. We were like casting out evil spirits and telling them to go away. And it was actually kind of a fun dream because my brother and I felt like we were oh, I forgot their names from Supernatural, the show. Um, I kind of felt like we were them, and we were there just like shooting all the demons and everything like that. That was actually a fun dream. But I have had dreams about that house and in that house for about 10 or 15 years. In fact, I actually just had a dream that involved that house just a couple weeks ago. That is the only part of my paranormal experiences that still occasionally happens to this day. Everything else, it doesn't. I mean, everything else is just I had a lot of experiences when I was younger, but I don't really have any today. Thank goodness. I don't want them. um, we're blessed to live in a really great house, um, and so I don't have those as much today. But beyond like paranormal experiences, I mean, it's not just like ghosts and demons. Like there's also dreams. I remember this was also in college. This was I think third, fourth year of college where oh sorry, no, this is first year of college. And I had a good friend of mine, his name's Adam, who had a good friend named Will. And there was one night where my friend Adam came rushing into our dorm room, and a bunch of us guys were just sitting there. We were playing Call of Duty, as a lot of college kids did. And he comes running in and said, "You guys need to come outside right now." Like he was very serious. Like I could tell something's wrong. And so a bunch of us guys get up and we're like okay, like what's wrong, man? Like what's going on? And this is about 1 or 2 in the morning. And so we follow Adam, and Adam leads us. He takes us outside and he walks over to a car that's in the parking lot. And as we're standing there, or sorry, as we're approaching the vehicle, we can hear like screaming, crying, like someone sounded like they were in agony. Well, we get to the vehicle and I can see that it's Will, like it's Will's vehicle. And I could see that in the back seat of the car was Will's girlfriend. And she was writhing in pain, like convulsing. I mean, her eyes had rolled to the back of her head and she was like foaming at the mouth. And I remember us guys were standing there and we had no idea what was going on. And she kept saying, "Fire, fire, fire." Like there was something in her way that wouldn't let her go. Fire. And she said the name Abila, Abila. And every time Will would go to restrain her, to help her not to wiggle around, she would scream in pain. And you'd let go, and there'd be a handprint that looked like a burn mark. It looked like a burn mark. And it was a really weird experience. We're all standing there not knowing what to do. And Adam knew that I had experience with paranormal things at this point in my life. And so he thought maybe I could help. And I didn't know what to do. So all of the other guys that were standing around didn't know what to do. So they just started saying prayers. I just started praying right there at the car. And just reached in and I grabbed her and she screamed. But as I did, she her eyes rolled front forward. So she screamed and then finally calms down. And she stopped writhing around, she stopped wiggling around, and she came to. And when she came to, she was like exhausted. I mean, she could barely talk. She couldn't really talk at all. Like she was completely out of it, completely exhausted. So us guys are standing there. We're just like, what just happened? And very quickly, Adam and Will, we were kind of like told us a little bit of a story about stuff that had been going on, about how there had been a demon that had been oppressing them for months at this time, and he had been having night terrors, hypnagogic dreams for some time. And so we all are sitting there thinking, wow, okay, we were just playing Call of Duty, and now suddenly there's this weird demonic attack in the back of a car at 2 in the morning in a parking lot. What's next? Well, what what happened was, it was me and then a couple of other guys said, okay, well, we need to get her home because she I don't think she was a resident, she was a commuter. So he said, well, we need to get her home, so let's just drive her home, right? Because she's obviously in no shape to drive home. So 3 of us guys piled into the car. Will sat in the back, me and Adam sat in the front, and he drove. And we took her to her dad's house, and we dropped her off at her dad's house, told him everything that happened, and Will like picked her up and like put her in bed and put her to sleep. Then because Will's house was so close, we decided, okay, well, let's just go to Will's house, and then we'll sleep there instead of driving all the way back to campus. Let's just do that. So that's what we did. Well, that night, I remember going to Will's house, and I remember sleeping on the floor. That night, I had one of the strangest dreams that I had ever had, and I was immediately I remember waking up in the dream, and I was in a place of brilliant light. I mean, it was like, if you've ever seen Harry Potter, the end where he's in that train station that's just like pure white, it was like that, but even like infinitely better. It was just pure and utter brilliant light everywhere, like perfect whiteness, perfect brilliance, perfect sunlight. Like it wasn't sunlight, it was like perfect radiant light that came from everywhere. And I remember looking down, like I didn't have a body. I was just there, just somehow there. And as I was getting adjusted to my surroundings, I started feeling these emotions. It was one emotion, then it was two, then it was three, and all these emotions just piled on top of each other. Imagine the best emotion that you've ever experienced. Imagine happiness, imagine joy, imagine peace. Imagine all of these emotions piling up onto each other. And not just that, but imagine the most perfect peace that you could ever experience, the most perfect joy that you could ever have, and the most perfect happiness that you could ever have. And an infinite number of emotions on top of that. Imagine them all in their perfect form without anything lacking, all on top of each other, all at once, all at a single time. It was the most overwhelming feeling that I'd ever had in my life. And I remember in the dream, I just started bawling my eyes out, like completely, because I couldn't handle the emotion. Like I couldn't handle the incredible wave of emotion that was happening. And as I was bawling my eyes out, there was a voice that very clearly spoke to me, and it said, Adam, everything's going to be okay. Adam, everything's going to be okay. And I woke up. And when I woke up, I had tears running down my eyes because I had been crying in in real life as I'd been crying in that dream. I think, you know, an interpretation could be very clear and obvious that maybe I was somewhere heavenly. Don't know if I was in heaven. I don't know exactly where it was, but I think you could argue that perhaps I was in the presence of the Lord. I don't know. But I had never had something like that happen to me in my life. Because usually dreams are comprehensible. Usually you have a dream and you're able to point to things in your previous days that make sense to that dream, right? Like I could point to like, oh yeah, like I had this weird dream about a grilled cheese sandwich because 2 days ago I was making a bunch of grilled cheese sandwiches. Nothing of the nature could I point to in my life that would make sense of that dream. The second dream I had was actually a couple years after this, and this was the exact opposite dream. I was at a very dark, very depressed, very angry point in my life. And I remember sleeping. This is when I lived in an apartment. I lived in an apartment at this time, and same Adam from the first story, he was my roommate. And I remember falling asleep, and I was immediately cast downward. And as I was cast downward, I remember waking up and like seeing utter darkness. I mean, it wasn't just darkness, but it was isolation. It was like separatedness. I was completely separated from all things that are living and that are good and that are holy and everything. And suddenly it felt like my body was being ripped to shreds over and over and over again. It was like, if you've ever seen those Stretch Armstrongs, those like really elastic like toys, that's what it was like, but it was over and over and over again. And what it felt like is, if you can imagine, like, and this is like kind of an argument for annihilationism, but not really. But if you imagine like you are cast into hell, and God says you're you don't want me, and so I'm going to separate myself from you and give you what you want. Well, that means that every single thing about you that is God is constantly being pulled away from you. But the problem is you're made in the image of God. So if you're made in the image of God and you're in a place that is the complete absence of God, then all of those aspects of you that are God's image are going to be just completely annihilated and pull away from your being. And that's exactly what it felt like being in this space. It felt like every single good aspect of who I was, every single aspect of God's image that was in me was being pulled away, like dramatically pulled away from me for all of eternity. And it's just a never ending void of darkness, emptiness. There's nothing there except blackness and the soul wrenching pain of being torn to shreds from the very foundation of your soul. I remember there was this scream that started welling up as I started experiencing this, and it got so loud that I screamed myself awake at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And thankfully, no one else was there because my roommate was gone. But I screamed myself awake and I was sweating because I was in such a panic that I had had such a nightmarish dream. The emotion from the first dream when I was in heaven, the presence, a heavenly place, or wherever it might have been. I mean, that was intense emotion. The emotions from the second dream, I had never experienced fear to that degree. Like it wasn't just fear. It was like desperate agony at the realization that you had made a choice that costs you everything. And having that experience and that realization for all of eternity. So those are just some of my experiences. um, as I said, I don't really have many of them today, which is surprising. Some might think boring. I'm very thankful for it. But I still have the occasional strangeness, like the house. Like I said, I literally just had a dream about that house last couple weeks ago. Actually, I don't know why. I don't know anything. I've never seen the house in my life. I could, if I saw it in person, like if I was driving down the road and I look over and I see the house, I'd be like, whoa, I would recognize it for sure if it exists in real life, but I have never seen it. I don't know if it's real. I don't know why I keep having dreams about it. Even though I feel like I've forgotten, it's like sometimes I forget about it. I forget, like, oh yeah, I forget that I have dreams about this house sometimes. And then like a year goes by and then suddenly I have another dream about it for no reason, no apparent reason. I'm just like minding my own business. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that really creepy, uncomfortable house. Like, oh yeah, yeah, you're gonna have another dream about it for some weird reason. I don't know why. I really don't. If I ever see it in person, I will immediately pull in, knock on the door, and be like, "Can I just come into your house for a minute?" Which would be really weird, but I know. But uh, so those are some of my stories. If you have stories, I would love to hear yours. Again, those are just a few of them, and I probably have more that I'm not thinking of right now. Um, but those are some of the more prominent ones that really stand out. And so, to get to our question today, do you believe in ghosts? Well, it depends on how we define ghosts, because I mean, do I believe in otherworldly things? Of course I do. Like I believe in things that aren't necessarily from this world. But do I believe in ghosts in the sense that they're the spirits of people who have died and are either roaming the earth because they have unfinished business, or because they died such a traumatic death that there is sort of a repetitious imprint of their life on the earth, and so they live out the trauma over and over again? I would probably say no, not in the direct and obvious sense that we might think. I would say no, f- for several reasons. Um, the first reason would be because of I think it would be just my personal experience, and I unfortunately don't. I mean, we're already at 43 minutes here, so I don't have time to get into that. But I would love to, if you're interested in hearing about it. I have a perspective on the relationship between paranormal experiences, um, and scripture, and like phenomenological philosophical worldview, and just kind of melding them all together. I do have a perspective, but I won't get into that now. But I'll say the second reason is, just based on what the Bible has to say. As a Christian, obviously, if I have a question such as, are ghosts real? I'm interested in what the Bible has to say, if it has to say anything about it. And surprisingly, the Bible does have two ish instances. I say ish because the second's debatable. Two ish instances where there are actually ghosts in Scripture. And the first one, comes from First Samuel. If you've ever studied the Old Testament, you know the story of Samuel. And this is First Samuel chapter 28, where Saul really desperately needed to. He was seeking wisdom from the Lord, right? Because he was in a war, in a battle with the Philistines, and he said, like, Lord, I need you to tell me, like, am I going to win? And then God just wasn't speaking to him. God was not speaking to Saul. And so he, as a desperate measure, goes out and he finds a woman who is a medium. And his advisors say to him, well, there is a woman in Endor who is a medium. And so, thus, the witch of Endor. And he disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 other men went to the woman. Consult a spirit for me, he said, and bring for me the one that I name. But the woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off mediums and spiritists from the land. That's something that Saul had done earlier on, as he had cast away all of the spirits and all the mediums from the kingdom. And so she says, why have you set a trap for me, for my life, to bring about my death? Saul swore to her by the Lord, as surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this. So the woman asked, who shall I bring for you? Bring up Samuel, he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried at the top of her voice and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. To the king said to her, don't be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said, I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth. What does he look like? He asked. An old man wearing a robe is coming up, she said. Then Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I am in great distress, Saul said. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by the prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do. Samuel said, why do you consult me, now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to your neighbors. And so Saul clearly sees Samuel, and that's in the Old Testament. Goes to the witch of Endor, asks the witch of Endor to summon the spirit, and there's Samuel right there. And she's afraid. And she's startled because she probably wasn't expecting to actually see Samuel. More likely, she was probably just expecting to hear voices or information from whatever spirit that she did commune with. Some might call that a familiar. There's right words for it in kind of the witchcraft world, but she probably communed with evil dark spirits that she shouldn't commune with. And so she was expecting to hear from that evil dark spirit, but instead Samuel just comes out of nowhere, and so it startles her. And Samuel essentially says to Saul, like, you've turned away from God, so God's turned away from you. And he essentially says that, yeah, you're gonna die in this battle with the Philistines. The second part, or second moment, I say it's debatable because I think there's a difference between what happens here in the second story, what happens with Samuel. The second one is in Matthew chapter 17, it's the transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them high up on a mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking to Jesus. Some would argue that Moses and Elijah were ghosts in a sense that they had died, but then suddenly they were there. Well, maybe. I also think that it could be argued that those were actually the glorified forms of Moses and Elijah. Just like they were seeing transfigured Jesus, they were seeing a glorified form of Moses and Elijah, which I would argue is not a ghost. It's something much different. So the Bible seems, well, I guess the question is, so are ghosts real, right? If Saul saw a ghost, does that mean ghosts are real? Well, I don't think so, because you have to take all of Scripture into account, and the fact that we don't see, number one, we don't see this really occurring again in Scripture, and number two, we don't ever see this type of thing painted in a positive light, summoning spirits through the witch of Endor. The Bible seems to clearly imply that human spirits are sent to either one of two places when they pass. And we see this most clearly in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Um, the time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. This is Luke chapter 16. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So Jesus here is painting us a very clear picture of when you die, you're either in Hades, right? So I guess Hades would be not necessarily the final resting place, but more like the after the life. That's like where the more like hell and not like the final destination after the judgment throne. But we can see that the rich man ends up in Hades and Lazarus ends up with Abraham and Abraham's side, carried by the angels. So it seems very clear that there really is no like in between phase of, oh well, Lazarus like became a ghost, just kind of like haunted the rich man for a while, and because the rich man never gave him things, or vice versa, or something like that. There really isn't any passage that says that gives us an indication that ghosts are a normal, simple thing. Um, so what do we do about ghosts then? Right? Like, so it seems clear from scripture, if you're reading the Bible, that there really is no indication that when someone dies that their spirit remains. In fact, it would seem more likely the opposite. And that the story of Saul and Samuel is actually an exception. God exceptionally used Samuel to speak to Saul to give him a message of condemnation and destruction. And that was a very special case in which God allowed that to happen. And I think we can see that by the startledness of the Witch of Endor and by the quietness of the spirit that she communes with, because it was obvious that God was intervening so that Samuel can tell Saul what he what he needed to hear, or what God needed to say to him. And we can say that's a special instance because, well, we don't really see that occurring again in Scripture. So then, what are we to do with these weird stories and strange goings ons that we hear about, pictures, videos, with whatnot? What do we do about them? I mean, if if the Bible doesn't really give us any inclination to believe that there are ghosts, then what do we do with the ghost stories that we hear all the time? Well, you've obviously know where this is going, but I think that there are two, or I think that it's more likely the case that what we believe are ghosts are dark forces, evil spirits, demons, right? And I think that there are two possible explanations. So when we're entering into the ghostly interactions, paranormal experiences are actually just demons interacting into the world, disguising themselves as different people, disguising themselves under, darkness, whatever. They're disguising themselves so that we don't recognize them. That explanation, well, there's two possible ways that we can leverage that explanation. The first one is that fallen angels, demons are fallen angels, and those fallen angels are currently at work in the earth, tempting and leading people astray, and oppressing Christians and such and such. There's several passages throughout Scripture that talk about demons. In Revelation chapter 12:9, we see the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, who leads the whole world astray. He hurled to the earth. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So this gives us an indication here, John giving us an indication that perhaps there were some angels who rebelled with Satan, and they were, just as Satan was cast to earth, these rebellious angels were cast down as well. 2 Peter 2:4 here, quoting Jude, says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment." So we again here have another indication that it sounds like these dark evil forces could be angels that rebelled when Satan had rebelled. This passage we also see again in Jude, verse 6, and angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. These he kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. Now here's the trouble with these verses. The trouble is that some people would argue that if the demons are in fact bound, and they're going to be bound until the day of judgment, then how can we say that they're currently residing on earth, roaming around earth, tempting people, leading people astray, if they're supposed to be bound? Well, there's two interpretations of this. And I think there's credibility for both, but I think one's a little more likely than the other. The first interpretation, which we'll just go over briefly, is the Nephilim interpretation. And this interpretation would say that in Genesis chapter 6, when it says that the sons of God came and had relationships with the daughters of men, and they bore children, and those children were called the Nephilim. What that was is it was those fallen angels, those angels who had chosen to rebel and were cast down to the earth. They had sexual relations with women, and the offspring of those relations were the Nephilim, which were giants. Giants in the Bible, that's a whole other conversation. But the Nephilim were giants, and they were multiplied and they roamed the earth, and they were incredibly wicked and evil and perverse. And when we say giants, we mean like massive, like tall, like 15 to 20 feet tall humanoid people. Well, it got so bad that God destroyed the earth with a flood. And the giants, the Nephilim, were one of the biggest reasons why God destroyed the earth, because they had gotten out of such control and they were so wicked and incredibly, perverse. Well, this point of view would argue that when the Nephilim died, their spirits went neither there nor here, because they're a hybrid of something that's the image of God and something that's a perversion of God's creation. And so rather than going to heaven or hell, those spirits were cursed to wander the earth. And so the interactions and those experiences that people so often have today, what they actually are the spirits of the Nephilim from many, many millennia ago, still roaming the earth today, because they have no body, they have no form, they have no soul, they have no spirit, like actual spirit. So they have no final destination except to just be restless for all of eternity. And that's why they're constantly seeking to possess people, so that they can have physical form again. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation would be that the language is more figurative than literal. So, for example, when Jude says that he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day, they would say, well, they're not actual physical chains, because he uses the word everlasting, which could be argued that he's actually saying that their fate is sealed, that their eternal fate is sealed, and thus he's using the picture of everlasting chains. And on the great day of judgment, that fate is going to be delivered to them. Same thing would apply to 2 Peter 2. Put them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Same argument we made there, that the chains that are holding them are actually they're actually their destination. That's actually their the consequences of their actions. That's what's been sealed, and that indeed what occurs today, whether it's seance worship, all sorts of stuff that goes on today, they are actually in fact worshiping demons. They are in fact summoning demons. There are in fact those experiences that people have are in fact demonic in nature. So those are two just kind of broad interpretations. I would lean more towards it being figurative, and the reason why is because the Nephilim explanation depends a lot on the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch, uh, there's a lot of good reasons why it's not in the modern Christian canon. I think the only canon that it's in is the Coptic Church in Ethiopia. I think I could be wrong, but there's a reason why it's not considered inspired. And even though there were some early church fathers who thought that maybe it could be inspired, at no real point has it ever been considered canon. And so, because it depends so much on the Book of Enoch, I would say, well, I think this is kind of more of a mystical interpretation than it really is. Because if you take away the Book of Enoch, you don't really have a whole lot to go on to make the argument that the spirits are actually the Nephilim. But I do think that there, might be within the realm of demons. I think that there is a lot of actual diversity. Like when Paul says, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and the rulers of the air." I think that he's referring to different manifestations of evil spirits. And again, we'll get more into that another time. If you want to hear more about it, I would love to talk more about it if you're interested in it. Um, what that means, different types of different manifestations. What does that mean? When we say that we had a demonic experience, like what exactly are we experiencing? Like when someone says, "Oh, I had a dream about a shadow person," what exactly is that? EVP recordings, things like that. What exactly are those? That's something I could get much deeper into. So if you would like to hear that, leave a comment, leave something over in the chat. I'd be happy to dive into that. Um, but that's where I'm going to end it for tonight. And I hope I didn't scare you too much. It wasn't that scary. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it is. I've just told it so many times that I forgot how scary it is. But thanks for joining me tonight on this Thursday night. We're going to be back to our Friday nights next week. Looking forward to that. And so watch out, keep a lookout. If you're on YouTube, especially, the live stream is usually, I try to get the thumbnail, like I try to get the stream scheduled like 5-6 days before. So keep an eye out for that, to see what the question is going to be for next week. Again, if you have a question that you would like for me to answer or to wrestle with, I would love to answer it. So please, scan that QR code right there, and submit your question. And I would love to have you on the show. I would love to wrestle through questions and topics together with you. I'm looking forward to next week. We're going to get back to some kind of regular questions next week. If you've watched the previous couple of episodes, you'll know that I kind of I kind of went away from philosophical questions and kind of dealt with some cultural conversations, I guess you could put it, just because there were top topics that were immediate and topics that I were really on my mind and I really wanted to talk about. But next week we're going to kind of get back into philosophy. And so if you want to hear more philosophy, tune in next week. If you want to hear more culture, again, let me know that in the comments. I would love to hear. But we're going to get a little bit more into philosophy next week. So hope you all have a wonderful and incredible night. Thank you for joining me. I love you all, and stay safe. And tomorrow, if you're gonna, I guess, celebrate Halloween, I don't know if celebrate's the right word. Stay away from Ouija boards. Stay away from seances. I think that there's two groups of people. Like there's Christians that are like extremely anti Halloween, anything Halloween, like at all. And then there's other Christians that like just have fun dressing up, like carving pumpkins, watch over the garden wall, right? There's I think there's different ways that Christians handle Halloween, but I think Paul's words to us in 2 Corinthians, or was it 1 Corinthians 10 or 2 Corinthians 10? Now I don't remember. Where he talks about meat offered to idols. I think that's just words of wisdom, because to me none of those things have power. Like there's never a line where, like, there's never a time where I'm going to cross over that line and just like go back to having a seance and reading tarot cards and stuff like that. I'm never going to do that, obviously. But the things like pumpkin carving and dressing up like a scary ghoul, and like passing out candy and going to costume parties and um, stuff like that, none of those hold any sort of spiritual significance to me. It's just a fun holiday during a beautiful season of the year, and so I enjoy it. But I enjoy it because I have freedom in Christ, and and those things have no power over me. But I also understand that for some people, it's a very sensitive thing, and you're very sensitive to it. And if you're very sensitive to it, then don't partake in it. I mean, don't don't go to costume parties or pass out candy or anything like that. But I also think that because of our freedom in Christ, that to the Jews, or to the Greeks, I was a Greek, right? Um, as Paul says. So I think there's freedom to enjoy it if you want to enjoy it, but enjoy it to a point, right? Don't cross over that line where you're no longer glorifying God and where you're actively pursuing something that you shouldn't. Anyway, with that said, I'm going to leave you all. Have a wonderful night, and I will catch you next week.